I simulated 10 seasons of F1 23 with Andretti in the sport. We start off in season 1 with a typical dominant performance by Verstappen as he claimed 11 wins on his way to 371 points. Behind the Red Bulls it was pretty close as Hamilton finished 3rd and the Ferraris were right behind him. In the Constructors, Ferrari was in front of Mercedes and Aston Martin were ahead of AlphaTauri who were in 6th. Big points were scored for all the backmarker teams and Andretti only scored 8 points to keep them off the bottom of the standings. Into the driver moves now, and at mid-season Zhou moved to McLaren, Ricciardo replaced him at Alfa Romeo, Hülkenberg went to AlphaTauri, Albon once again went to Haas and Piastri moved to the Williams team. At post-season though, it all kicked off after Alonso called it quits. Leclerc joined Aston Martin as Norris moved to Ferrari and George Russell went to McLaren. Ocon replaced Russell at Mercedes as he's finally got that seat and Magnussen went to Alpine. Sargent was dropped by Williams and in his place was Zhou as Gasly replaced him at McLaren. Bottas moved to Alpine in place of Gasly, Hülkenberg went to Alfa Romeo, Albon went back to the Red Bull sister team, Piastri and Drogovic went to Haas and Deruvala moved to Williams. Finally, Stroll was dropped by Aston Martin as Hauger came in to replace him and Pourchaire filled the hole left by Drogovic at Andretti to complete the grid for season 2. For next season we have aero and chassis reg changes and in the R&D chart we have Red Bull clear at the front with Mercedes, Ferrari and Aston Martin behind them. Andretti are comfortably in the midfield but it is very close and the order could be shaken up with these new reg changes. Well, the reg changes clearly work because the championship was incredibly close. Russell missed out on his first title by 8 points and the order changed at the top. Ferrari won out over Red Bull by 4 points and McLaren also broke into the 400 point mark. Wins were spread out over 7 drivers and even Hamilton got a win to make it 104. Gasly also won at Monaco in the McLaren and would go on to get another first at the final race in Abu Dhabi. Points were harder to come by for the teams at the back though, and as a result Andretti finished 10th with 0 points ahead of Williams and behind Alfa Romeo and Haas. AlphaTauri had seemingly gotten out of the backmarker group because they once again scored good points and came 7th in the Constructors. Back to the drivers and Hamilton was retiring for season 3, so let's move on to the moves. At mid-season Aston Martin dropped Hauger for Sargent, but at post-season it kicked off again with Hamilton leaving. First to move was Ricciardo, who got in the Mercedes seat finally after all the years of pointless speculation. Deruvala went to Alfa Romeo, Magnussen went to Williams and Stroll moved to Alpine. Another retirement on the grid was Bottas, which led to Charles Leclerc moving to Alpine. Hülkenberg in turn went to Aston Martin and Zhou returned to Alfa Romeo as his adventure with different teams was over. Drogovic moved to Williams, Sargent joined Haas, Piastri got back in a good car and Pourchaire completed the grid for season 3 at Haas. And looking at the chart, Red Bull and McLaren are neck and neck at the top and we can expect some good fights to come in the next few years. But looking at Andretti's progress, well, the reg changes were not too kind to them due to money issues and so it was hard to climb up the grid. But let's move into season 3. Well, McLaren were back as they came 1 and 2 in the drivers and comfortably won the Constructors ahead of Red Bull. Gasly was our new champion as Russell missed out again, this time by 17 points. Verstappen was also in the hunt but ultimately Gasly was too good for his challengers. There were loads of DNFs in the top 5 as well, so that might have been the issue. Alpine climbed to 5th in the standings, mainly due to Leclerc's 69 points, and Mercedes did not have the best of years. AlphaTauri scored points again, and Andretti did not, but they were 9th this time. Moving on to the driver moves, and at post-season, Norris and Ricciardo swapped seats as Lawson joined Mercedes as he replaced Ocon. Esteban moved to Williams as Sargent was dropped by another team as he replaced him with Drogovic. Piastri joined Williams again and Zhou managed to get a move to Aston Martin. Finally, Tsunoda moved to Alfa Romeo as Magnussen went to AlphaTauri. These have been some chaotic first seasons and that would continue as for season 4 we have powertrain and durability regulation changes. The chart shows us that McLaren and Ferrari are the best teams with Red Bull dropping down to only 3rd best. Andretti are also still stuck in the lower midfield but hopefully these reg changes can help them up the grid. The standings did change for season 4 as Russell finally got his title, this time 9 points ahead of his teammate Gasly. McLaren was so far clear of 2nd place it's not even funny and 3rd place was in the 100s in terms of points while both McLarens were in the 300s. In fact, McLaren as a team won every single race for the first time ever. Yes, it's only a 16 race calendar but still. The Ferraris were pretty evenly matched and the Red Bulls as well, with Verstappen only 2 points ahead of Perez. Leclerc carried Alpine again with his 62 points, putting the team in 5th once again as well. But at the back, Andretti did score a point to finish above AlphaTauri, who have fallen off because of the regulation changes. Into the driver market, and at mid-season, Lawson was dropped for Logan Sargent at Mercedes, and at post-season, Ricciardo went back to McLaren as Gasly ditched his championship-winning team for the red of Ferrari. Pourchaire replaced Sargent at Mercedes and Hülkenberg retired, which led to Sargent keeping a place on the grid with Aston Martin. And finally, Kalen Williams joined Haas and Dennis Hauger moved to Andretti. With no reg changes coming, the Andretti team could start to climb up the grid. The chart also shows them as being pretty good come the end of the year as they got out of the initial slump pretty quickly. In season 5, Russell stayed on top and McLaren were miles ahead again. Ricciardo wasn't far off in the championship and he was nearly 100 points ahead of 3rd place Verstappen. Perez was off it this year, which meant that the well-matched pair of Norris and Pourchaire got Mercedes 2nd place in the Constructors by 4 points. Ferrari were just in their own world in 4th and Alpine were nearly beaten to 5th by the Andretti team. Dennis Hauger managed to get into the top 10 with 58 points and some great performances. In fact, the car had been improving so much that Hauger got a podium at Vegas. You can see the R&D chart here and how much Andretti improved come the end of the year. They were right up there as it was insanely close at the front of the grid. But let's get into the driver market. There weren't many moves, but there were 2 retirements as Perez and Magnussen both left the sport. This led to Doohan going to AlphaTauri to replace Magnussen and Piastri getting a move to Red Bull, with Lawson completing the grid for season 6. However, there were massive rig changes coming for season 6 as aero, chassis and durability would be affected. With Andretti spending most of their money finally being able to compete with the big boys, this could potentially backfire in their face with these reg changes. With all that said, let's get into season 6. The table gives some pretty grim readings. Andretti got 0 points. But at the front and at the interesting end of the standings, Russell won another championship as Ricciardo was there or thereabouts in 2nd place, being 30 points behind in the end. Red Bull were better this time as Piastri and Verstappen were a good pairing, but that McLaren is just too fast. Another change for this season was Alpine, who finally gave Leclerc a decent car, with which he got 150 points to help them finish 4th. A big loser was also Mercedes as they got only 7 points in this whole season. It was definitely a good lineup, but their car was just nowhere. The R&D chart backs this up. As you can see from the start of the year, Mercedes and Andretti dropped massively after the reg changes, with a lot of the teams not being affected at all. By the end of the season, Andretti had only caught up to Alfa Romeo and Haas, and Mercedes were only level with Williams. Red Bull, McLaren, Ferrari and Alpine were all close to the top and Aston weren't that far behind in 5th. Onto the driver moves though, and Lawson was first to go as he was dropped by Williams for Yuki Tsunoda. Pourchaire ditched the Mercedes project for Alfa Romeo and Ocon returned to the Silver Arrows. Stroll returned to Williams after a good year with Alpine and Doohan finally got the seat in that team. And finally, to complete the grid, Vips went to AlphaTauri. There was a powertrain regulation change for season 7, so let's hope Andretti can fight their way back up the grid. It was boring once again at the top as Russell and Ricciardo were the only 2 drivers to break the 300 point mark, and McLaren were another 200 points in front of Red Bull in 2nd. The top 4 was the same, but even though Alpine were close to the top, this translated into a pretty flat 4th place, which easily could have been worse. Aston Martin were close and Alfa Romeo beat Mercedes with 64 points. Pourchaire got all but 2 of their points as his decision to leave Mercedes was the right one. Andretti didn't score any points and finished dead last again though. But now we move into the driver transfers. At mid-season, Doohan was dropped for Lawson and at post-season, Albon retired. This led to Doohan going back to AlphaTauri, Leclerc returned to Ferrari as he and Sainz did a seat swap, and Lawson went to Williams. Vesti went to Alpine to replace Lawson, and finally Ocon retired, leading to Stroll going to Mercedes. After having to recover from another regulation change, the R&D chart showed Andretti just ahead of Haas, Mercedes dropping again but recovering well, and McLaren and Aston Martin being level at the top. Alfa Romeo were also near the top and it was very close up there. For season 8 it was yet more McLaren dominance, but finally Ricciardo had beaten Russell. It was only by 3 points, but it was enough as even Verstappen had a chance. The team were not as clear as before, but still sweep the constructors by over 100 points. Mercedes were also 3rd, mainly because Norris got 221 of their 243 points. There were big shocks though, as Lawson was 8th for Williams as he helped them to get 5th in the constructors, with Alfa Romeo being 6th. Aston were only 8th and Alpine were 9th because Andretti were back. 7th place in the constructors and another 10th place for Dennis Hauger, who got all of the points. Into the driver market now, and Hauger was tired of this yo-yoing from Andretti and left the team. Ricciardo was elected to replace him. Elsewhere, Vesti was dropped as Novalak headed to the French team, Piastri returned to McLaren and Leclerc went to Red Bull, with Verschoor replacing Charles at Ferrari. For season 9 we have massive reg changes as aero, chassis and durability are all affected. Hopefully this can change the order at the top because we could really do with someone other than McLaren winning. Well, our wishes would have come true had McLaren not won again, but finally Piastri gets his first title in his first season back at Woking. It was a bit closer though as Verstappen got 217 points, being only 40 points behind by the end of it. Williams continued their rise as they finished 5th again, and on the other end of the stick, Andretti dropped a place as they could only get 13 points. We'll look at the R&D chart as for why. After those huge reg changes, we just couldn't save all of the parts, and so there was a monumental drop off come race 1. By the end of the season we did recover, but that was only ahead of AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo and Haas. Into the driver market, and at mid-season Verschoor was replaced at Ferrari for Lando Norris, as Novalak was also dropped at Alpine for Hauger. With this, Sainz went to Mercedes and Iwasa moved to Williams. For once though, the post-season had less moves than mid-season because Hauger was dropped by Alpine and Caldwell moved to the team. Thankfully for Andretti, there aren't any regulation changes for the final season, so with peace finally being restored upon F1, can Andretti finally win a title in the sim? Well, let's find out. Unfortunately, they couldn't. That honour would go back to George Russell as McLaren won yet again. Andretti had recovered to a decent 4th though, as in a desperate last-ditch attempt to try and win the title, Andretti fired Ricciardo at mid-season and replaced him with Norris. No doubt this helped in that 4th place finish, but he couldn't do much, although he did win the final race in Abu Dhabi. This was an annoying save for Andretti as they were constantly screwed by the constant reg changes coming at the worst time, and also McLaren being so damn good. But if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel and thank you very much for watching.